pure horror anime, not really a thing. You would think that there would just be hundreds of these. Japanese horror is famous for being terrifying. There must be thousands of anime shows. There aren't. Well, hello, and welcome back to Gateway to Anime. How are you all? What's going on, Charlie?
Hello. I'm here and interested in what we're talking about today because it's something that has fascinated me in a long time about why it doesn't quite translate to anime. And this is very weird because I haven't actually said what we're talking about, but I won't spoil it because Sam likes to say that. So
Go for it.
I'll leave it, but we're talking about horror anime
There
today.
it is.
So I'm interested because I've often been like, it should by all accounts be the best medium for it, but is it?
It's actually a very good point, but first of all, Graham, how are you, my friend?
Terrified. Just living in perpetual fear.
In a state of horror. Yes, you are dead right. It's an interesting case, and it's sort of what we found when we did our samurai and ninja episode with Lewis last season, where you're like, there must be tons of these. Japanese horror is famous for being terrifying. There must be thousands of anime shows. There aren't, really. There are elements of horror in lots of things, but like when you talk about pure horror genre shows, there really aren't as many as you might think. And it's kind of weird. But what I'll do quickly is I'll just do a little history of horror in Japan before we jump over to what I think is quite possibly the most famous horror mangaka that exists.
Manga Boy.
The Manga Boys. Back in
We're
town.
really bringing out the
Like a
Manga Boy
thing.
this season, aren't we?
Manga Boy is back.
Yeah, you'd be remiss to swerve away from this creator.
Oh, yes. And, one of those shows are about to air, but we will talk about that soon. So let me reference a source. This was from rikumojournal.com, and the person was Rob Boucher, who is, I believe, the head of a Southeast Asian horror film festival, something like that. I might have totally got that incorrect, but if you go to that website, rikumojournal.com, you will find the text. I'm going to basically bastardize what he wrote, which is quite interesting, and he's obviously an expert in Japanese horror. I'm going to give you a quick breakdown of horror as a genre in Japanese media. So the earliest Japanese horror films actually were made in the 1920s. However, many of those are now lost to time. Like most horror films, Japanese horror is deeply rooted in the folk tales from their culture, not unlike how the Brothers Grimm and other fairy tales are the basis of a lot of US and European horror films of modern times. These folktales began as oral tradition, passed down from generation to generation, and originate through the Shinto belief system. One recurring entity is the Oni, which is an invisible demon or invisible demons who are present throughout most folktales. Oni is said to live among people and possess magic powers that create disease and natural disasters. Now, a subgenre within these folktales which deal with the occult are called yokai. The word yokai is used as a general reference to supernatural beings, but there are several subcategories such as bakemono, shapeshifters, yuri, vengeful spirits. Now, the yuri is probably most familiar to Western audiences in that it comes from the story of Okiku, who was thrown down a well by a samurai because she refused his romantic advances. Fair play.
I expect nothing less.
Standard.
We've all been there, babe.
Standard. Okiku returns as a vengeful spirit and is depicted with long black hair and a gravelly whispering voice. Might be ringing some bells.
Oh, ringing
now.
some bells.
Ringing some bells. Most yuri are depicted as female and they seek revenge on the men who have wronged them, gradually drive them insane. That is sort of the typical yuri story. Now, funnily enough, an Irish folklorist called Lafcadio Hearn began publishing and recording these folk stories in the late 19th century. He was fluent in Japanese and one of the very first foreigners or gaijin to become integrated into Japanese society.
Was he the first weeb?
Actually, that's a pretty good shout.
Right.
Hey.
Yeah.
That's actually a pretty good shout. We found the first weeb, ladies and
First
gentlemen.
weeb.
We found him.
He's Irish.
He's Irish too. Jesus.
He
compiled many stories of the yokai and published them in a 1904 journal entitled Kwaiden, Stories and Studies of Strange Things. So as mentioned before, there were numerous short films made in the early 20th century, the 1920s particularly, but they are now lost. But modern Japanese horror didn't really kick off until the mid-1960s. Onibana directed by Kenito Shindo in 1964, is generally considered the first of the modern Japanese horror genre. The following year, director Masaki Kobayashi released his horror anthology Kwaiden, which is, of course, a presentation of Hearn's collection of stories. The film was made up of 4 different horror vignettes from Hearn's initial stories, which he'd recorded from folklore. He actually won the special jury prize at the 1965 Cannes Film Festival. Kobayashi became one of the most influential directors of the genre, and not just in Japan, but around the world, as his more psychological form of horror was in stark contrast to what a lot of the US and European directors were doing at the time in the genre, which relied on jump scares and slasher films. A lot of the fear came from what wasn't shown and let your imagination do the work, which, you know, when you look at modern Japanese horror films, is quite a recurring theme with a very psychological type thing. And of course, 1990s brought us what is now known as J-horror, and moving into the early 2000s, which of course, Ringu, The Ring, which obviously got a very famous US remake. The Grudge, of course, same thing. And Pulse, which is another very famous one, which is kind of about the horrors of the internet. It's a horror film which uses the internet, but like in the early 2000s. I've actually seen it. It was on SBS one night and I watched it and I was like, this is fucking terrifying. That's just a basic history of Japanese horror. Yes, coming back to your point, which is so correct. You would think that there would just be hundreds of these in the anime world, right? There just aren't. It's weird, right? Even in films, even horror, even like animated films, I mean, there just aren't that many. Lots of elements involved. But pure horror anime, not really a thing.
Do you think it's a money thing? Like you can't really capitalize on like a show, like
think it is.
because there's a lot of like obviously a lot of I reckon you could argue that the new big 3 or like the what are they called the
Dark Trinity.
Dark Trinity all have horror elements.
Yep, absolutely.
Like Chainsaw Man has horror. Obviously, he turns into a
time.
literal chainsaw.
Yep.
Jujutsu Kaisen has it.
A lot
Like
of gore. Yeah.
Hell's Paradise, I assume, based on the title, probably has some kind of horror element to it. So there's a lot of horror adjacent animes that are popular.
Yeah.
But nothing that when I went to look up pure horror, like, which I think that in every other genre, there's clearly pure horror things. You're
Oh,
kinda
yeah.
like, yeah, absolutely. Slash films.
Well, Japanese horror films, massive genre. Just mentioned a few of them, you know, like.
Oh my God. And always like famously the scariest of all of them. Like, I don't know if anyone's seen Cabin in the Woods, that movie.
Oh, yeah, Joss Whedon.
Where they,
I love that movie.
oh my God, where there's this whole bit where they're kind of like, Japan failed, they never fail. And they have that like 100% success rate of horrifying
They've got
like
this
horror.
circle of girls all chanting.
all
Like,
chanting.
The next scene is just like disemboweled girls and stuff.
Oh my God. It is, yeah.
What a
So-
horrible human being he is, but I fucking love that movie.
Joss Whedon, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately. But yeah, it's really
famously the
quite
best at horror. And like,
Yeah.
I think that The Ring, the American remake's scary. The original Ringu is even scarier.
Fuck, it's so.
You know what is
fucking
actually scary
terrifying.
is the Grudge American.
Is Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Yeah,
Michelle.
and it's
Speaking of
set
Buffy
in
and Joss
it's
Whedon,
set in
yes.
Japan. Like she lives in Japan. And the original Grudge that I watched was actually, I think it was a TV movie. And I watched it once and like it's low budget, but that almost makes it more scary because you're like, what is going on here? Like what? This it was
Yeah.
like that kind of like
Well, it's
creepy.
the Yurei,
like,
isn't it? Yeah.
It's a lot.
Mm.
Yeah, it's that long hair, like
That's-
yeah.
It's
A vibe, to be honest.
certainly a vibe. Okay, if we're going to talk about the horror genre, and again, there's about to be an anime adaptation. There have been a few anime adaptations of this mangaka's work, which haven't been great. But as far as, if we're going to talk about seminal horror creators, we cannot not talk about Junji Ito. So Graham, tell us about Junji.
Manga boy, you're up.
Manga Boy's in.
I don't even know how you begin to summarize Junji Ito's work.
Mm.
I mean, put it in your parlance, I would say he's the undisputed king of
I'm
horror mangaka.
going to also coronate this.
Yeah.
Yes. Undisputed king of horror manga. No question.
Yeah, so I for this horror manga episode, I'm going to talk about Uzumaki, which I think people would consider his.
Naruto? Sorry, I got.
Well, let me bring that back. Yeah.
Sorry.
So Uzumaki, the direct translation for Uzumaki is spiral or swirl, and then Naruto has this swirl sort of
The seal.
Seal, yeah.
is the whole thing. I don't know if that's why he was named that.
Part of the clan, his mum's clan.
Yeah.
is
Yeah,
Uzumaki
it's the
clan.
seal.
Just a coincidence.
I think
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
special. They
They
specialize in
specialize in
seals.
seals. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're the seal clan. Yeah.
Still
Mate,
learning about Naruto for
So
20
good.
years later. Fucking great show. But yeah, I think people would consider Uzumaki his magnum opus of sort of horror. It's going to be an anime. It's the one you see on T-shirts a lot. Like a lot of his artwork gets put on just like Japanese streetwear as well,
Mhm.
which is kind of like, that's
terrifying.
really the only sort of marketable sort of horror manga anime stuff you see is Junji Ito's work on t-shirts as well. That's how I actually discovered it was.
Really?
Yeah, the girl whose face is all spiraled in, she's got like the
Yep.
one eyeball. That's how I was like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
That's cool.
That's
Isn't it?
Uzumaki.
That's the famous
Yeah.
image.
Someone's
Yeah.
like, oh, it's Junji Ito, blah, 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 blah. It's going to be a weird one to describe, to how to break this down. The story follows a girl called Kiri and her boyfriend, who I can't remember his name. I meant to write it down, but I didn't. I'm an idiot. Apologies. Where they find that the town itself has become obsessed with the concept of spirals, which that doesn't sound like anything. Like, what does that mean? But I think that's what Ito does really well is he takes these really sort of benign, almost mundane sort of concepts and just turns it into the most horrific thing you could think of.
Yeah.
That sounds scary to me.
Spirals?
Like if everyone was suddenly obsessed with spirals,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, it's pretty
creepy.
weird.
Like that's the kid that's writing Red Drum. That's like the
Yeah,
the drawing.
yeah.
Like that's yeah, I get it.
But even just to
Unsettling.
come up with the idea of that, a spiral, that's, one of the most natural things in nature is a spiral.
Yes.
We're going to flip that on his head.
Mm.
And I think that's what Junji Ito does really well is he takes normal things and makes them scary. Like there's a quote from him saying that he likes to look at the world backwards and that's what he finds scary. Normal mundane stuff becomes the stuff of sheer horror.
A lot of body horror in his work too, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a lot of, if you're like a fan of Cronenberg type stuff, like
absolutely.
body, I guess they call it body horror.
Surely he's influenced by Ito.
I don't
Or
know who
vice
came
versa,
first,
who
chicken
knows?
and the
Yeah,
egg,
that's a good
really.
question. I need to look that up.
Yeah, there is a lot of twisted figures, but he has the ability to make things like there's some of his short stories. There's stories about cats, and his cats, the way he's drawn them, are actually scary. And you're like, how the hell do you make a house cat scary? And he does.
I have a house cat. That's pretty easy.
It's pretty crazy.
Have you met Mitchie?
They're pretty scary.
This town becomes obsessed with spirals, and like the start of the manga just is the girl going to school and she sees the boyfriend's father and he's transfixed with looking at a snail on a wall. She calls out to him, like, "Hey, how are you? What's going on?" No response, and they just become more and more obsessed. I don't even want to tell you, like, to tell you what would happen would kind of spoil the actual horror of it. Junji Ito he's a master. I always say he's the master of the page turn. He keys up his stuff so well to the point where you're reading, oh man, this is quite tense and this is horrifying. And then you get to the last frame and you'll see a character whose just face is just horrified by something. And you have to turn that page. You know it's going to be something horrific.
What's it gonna be?
The panels is so laid out and you turn it and you're like, oh, I was not expecting that. Which is, he just keeps you off kilter. And I even think it comes down to his art style. Like, he draws a world very well. It's well structured. His people like look great, but there's always like an underlying sort of sense that something's off in the world. Like stuff just feels wrong, even though it's like, oh, it's a girl going to school. But there's the tension to it that I can't really put into words. I think it's some of the way he draws faces. A lot of his girls are very kind of porcelain doll sort of looking. Yep. They're all very symmetrical. It's the whole worlds are always off kilter, which I love. And he's one of these writers that it's like the spiral concept. He never really explains it. And I guess that just keeps you following the story because you're expecting answers and he's not really that willing to give you them.
Interesting. I mean, I think ambiguity is a very powerful tool as a storyteller.
Yeah.
Right? I think a lot of the time in the West, we get so obsessed to be like, yeah, but how does it work? Explain it to me exactly. And don't get me wrong. Yeah. Japan does the same thing with power systems and whatnot. It's like, they break it down to the most minute detail. But why I think someone like Junji Ito is so interesting is, again, like we said before, the idea of what isn't shown.
Yeah.
The psychological horror of not knowing is a very powerful tool in the horror genre, I think.
Also, to do it on the page is really impressive because I feel like most horror mediums are like sound influenced hugely.
Yes,
Like, look at Halloween, look at that famous soundtrack, look at that kind of suspense in that way. But one thing is that there was an adaptation of some of his works called the Junji Ito Collection that happened. And it flopped really badly.
It was bad,
And I think that people are saying that they couldn't quite capture his atmosphere, his aesthetic, like what he put on the page to that. I think it was an anthology, like it was all his short stories. I was really surprised because I remember thinking I was excited to just watch it and then everyone just told me not to.
Mm.
And I was like, I wonder if it's like his visuals or the way he paces the manga works really well on the page. I'd be interested to see how this adaptation goes.
This Uzumaki adaptation is highly anticipated, but it's taken them a long time. And I remember it came out last year. They showed an opening segment of it, and everyone was like, "Oh, this is." And again, it's perfect. You say off kilter because the way they've decided to animate it is very almost rotoscoped. I guess I strongly suggest if it hasn't come out, well, it won't have come out by the time this podcast comes out. But go look it up. Look up the Uzumaki teaser or whatever trailer, and then see what you think because it's a very interesting concept to me. I haven't look. Full disclosure, you would think that we would have done the horror genre earlier in our 5 seasons of doing this podcast. I'm not a horror guy. I'm not. Just not my jam. Do
you get scared of it or you just don't like it?
Don't like it. I'm scared too. Don't get me wrong. I'm a little bitch. I do get scared of horror. And also I just don't like, I'm like, it's the idea of I want to feel like fucking shit. I choose to feel terrified and unsettled. No, I don't. Life is hard enough, people. Why do you need this in your lives?
No, I like
the world is scary enough, people.
It's an adrenaline rush.
It's not though, especially when it's those really gory ones, man. I'm like, what the fuck is this?
No, I mean,
Saw, Hostel, miss me with that shit.
I'm not into the torture porny, all that shit. No.
Look,
but I love feeling unsettled and when I'm watching something, and I do enjoy slasher flicks hilariously.
Look, they're camp and funny in the 70s.
There are some
versions,
amazing ones.
Like Halloween's camp and funny.
Halloween's not camp and funny.
Evil Dead.
Spoken as someone who's never watched Halloween, obviously.
Oh no, sorry, Halloween's fucked.
Halloween's got one of the best opening sequences in cinematic history and one of the best soundtracks. It's an amazing
John Carpenter
film.
wrote that too, didn't he?
Absolutely. And it is, Halloween is an incredible film. And Scream is an incredible film as well.
Fun.
Has that held up?
Yes.
Yes. Scream's one of the first meta films.
It might be better because it is 90s.
Really?
It has that sort of.
And I've seen Scream.
The self-awareness of Scream was ahead of its time. So when we talked about Cabin in the Woods, Scream was kind of doing that before that. They were kind of going, here's the rules of the horror film.
I know what you did last summer as well.
See, that is a bad slasher film. Scream is very self-aware. One of the first ones to kind of be like, we're in a 90s slasher flick.
Yeah.
And you got a character there who is a movie fan who is like, hang on a second, guys. You got to play by the rules here. And it's a really good film.
I like The Evil Dead. That's fun.
Yeah, they're good.
I think my favorite horror film, which I saw way too young, I think I saw this film when I was about 4 years old, is The Thing.
The Thing is amazing.
And that's
Thing is amazing.
That's, again, body horror.
Yep.
But again, it brings that sort of tension with them being isolated in the Arctic at night.
And you don't know who it is.
You don't know who it is. The paranoia of it.
Last time I watched that, I really tried to track who the Thing was the whole way through, and you can't. It's
not possible.
It's a masterpiece.
I know. I'm like, it's a dog at one point. Got that.
It was a dog.
It's very sad. But then I'm kind of like, but that kind of tension, that kind of thing is what I'm into. And unfortunately, I haven't found an anime. I feel like the horror animes I've watched have just been kind of that torture porn body horror stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of it.
Devilman Crybaby, I nearly did for this.
Yeah.
Because that is a horror, but that's like a body horror, just a lot of violence.
Up, hey.
And to me, I just don't think that violence equals horror necessarily.
No, it doesn't.
They're
Not
really
anymore.
different things.
Oh, in 2022.
Which is weird because if you want to go and watch exactly what you're talking about, you go and watch Japanese horror films. Tension and release is the key to almost all art in general, right? When it's like music, drama, comedy, everything's tension and release, right? And horror is probably the biggest, the most extreme version of tension and release, right? It's and that's why the jump scares come out and get you, because it's like 10, bam, something happens, it's and it builds this tension for a long time. Soundtracks do a long part of it. The Grudge is one of those things. The Ring is one of those things. But why not anime? I
wonder if it's to do with the fact that it's animated that we don't it is that extra step away from reality, extra kind of
That's a good point.
You're kind of just I'll be shocked by a lot less if it's animated, I think, than if I saw it live action.
But you can also take things to such extreme in animation,
I think if you're smart enough about how you do your horror, I don't think you need blood and gore. One of the things that scares me, well, two things. If you go back to Doctor Who, there's the Weeping Angels they'll come for you when you're not looking. They're all statues. So as soon as you look away, they come for you. Terrifying.
Hate that. Love it. But hate it.
Hated it. Love it. Still look at a statue going, I'm not keeping my eye on you.
Got you. Sir.
There's also another race of aliens in it that will, as soon as you look away, you forget. So you look away and then something's going to happen. You look away and you forget.
Huh.
Like there's ways of scaring people without just tying them to a chair and cutting pieces off people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which I
I
think
mean-
Japanese horror does superbly.
Yes. I mean, one of the scariest and best episodes of Buffy is Hush.
Oh, yeah.
Not a damn sound.
Yeah.
What do you think's the scariest movie you've ever watched? This is off track, but what do you think the scariest movie you've ever watched is?
I remember being pretty fucking terrified at the Japanese Ring when I saw it.
Yeah, it is scary.
It really, and I was young, that terrified me. I remember watching, also very young, and it relies almost exclusively on jump scares, but What Lies Beneath, Harrison Ford, that scared the fuck out of me, man.
God, we were so different. I fucking loved horror movies growing up. I used to watch it. I used to go to sleepovers and watch all of them marathon and like. But What Lies Beneath is not scary at all. You should watch that again.
I'm telling you, I'm a little bit. I'm telling you, I'm not into
Harrison
this stuff.
Ford and Michelle.
Yeah,
Michelle
that was
Pfeiffer
scaring
in a
me,
bath.
bro. Fuck.
I think mine is
Good shit.
Leave me alone.
Mine is probably still Alien, I think. I think it's probably the whole thing about forced pregnancy
Oh, yeah, that's pretty
as
fucked.
a male, like, kind of scares me. And also this sort of claustrophobic tension that it has and the score and stuff.
It's a great film. But
That's
would you
a-
say it's a thriller or a horror or sci-fi?
Sci-fi
Many
horror.
things.
Sci-fi horror for sure.
psychological
Yeah, at least the
horror.
first one is sci-fi.
Yeah,
horror.
yeah.
Yeah. So 2, when I was really young, way too young, I snuck downstairs and I watched The Exorcist and I think I fully scarred myself for life. I reckon I was maybe 7.
Oh,
8.
Jesus, really?
And I fully then became obsessed with The Exorcist and then went to school and started writing in my diary as though I was I was possessed.
I was
Pretty funny.
obsessed as a kid after I saw Friday the 13th.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
Drawing Jason and chainsaws and people getting chopped in half when I was about 8 or 9.
Fully child
The-
psychiatrist.
in school, and the kids were
We
like,
need to talk about Graham.
Oh
and
my
my parents had to
God.
go, "Hey, is this kid all right?" Like, no, he just
Ah.
watched some movies he probably shouldn't have. So
Yeah,
But the
fuck.
thing that scares me the most, the recent film, this is really dumb, I'm going to admit this scared the shit out of me, was actually The Conjuring. Scared me so much. And that is a classic horror house film
Yeah.
that was done. And like, I realize this is so off tangent, but I was like, the reason
on,
why like those kind of horror house ones are really, there's so many of them, is they're so cheap to do. You find
Yeah.
a location, you film on them, you
Just
can
go for
make,
it.
and like The Conjuring, they got that down to a fine art. And that film is so good. Like the way that they plan every scare, everything. And like, I'm not easy to scare. I watched The Exorcist at age 7. Like,
yeah.
come at me.
Yo, come at me. Yo.
But like, for some
you were
reason,
asleep, tucked up
any-
in bed, just shivering
Sam's
with
terrified of What Lies Beneath.
your nightlight on.
But I think that I genuinely get more afraid of the not the violence, none of that. It's
it's
the like
the uncertainty.
it's the ghosty like uncertainty and like this really paranormal stuff that
The
get to me.
ghosty.
The ghosties scare the shit. Paranormal activity scare the shit out of me.
Oh,
Paranoid too. is
okay.
bad.
I actually went on a date to
a good
paranormal
That's a good
activity.
date. I've done a few horror movie dates.
And
yeah,
it
they're
was a
fun.
disaster. Like, because I
Oh,
was
you
were not okay?
hysterical.
weeping in the aisles. Like,
She was fine and you were like,
I was hysterical afterwards. I was like, well, the vibe's not here, yo.
Yeah.
we ruined it.
the vibe's not here.
The vibe's not here.
Talk about a genius movie making strategy. Like their budget, I think has a record
Blair
for
Witch as
making.
well, right?
Yeah, but I think that Paranormal
I think
Activity
Paranormal
more
Activity
so.
is,
Yeah.
It's cheaper and they made so much money back. It's like it's got the record for the like lowest budget, highest return. That and Blair
Right.
Witch. Blair Witch had such a hold on us in the 90s. It's
Blair
not
Witch did a
scary.
whole thing to us back then, didn't it? I remember being terrified of that as a 12-year-old or whatever.
I think I hadn't seen it and I was scared of it. And then I watched it and I was like, this isn't scary.
Right.
I used to be at my friend's house. Their parents would let us hire out R18 films when we were like 13. So I watched Blair Witch really early on in
Responsible.
life.
I
And
was
I was
scared
like,
of- normal movies. Horror didn't have effect, but if you showed me the end scene of Who Framed Roger Rabbit with Christopher Lloyd turning into a cartoon,
that is scary. That's scary.
Jesus Christ, that scared me.
Yeah, that is scary. Same
The
with
rabbit
like,
getting lowered into the dip, that traumatized me. I
same with
watched
like,
The Thing before I saw that, and I was like, well, this is
Oh.
true horror. This is where the real horror
Not the
is.
cartoon world, no.
yeah, so many films like that. Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, terrifying film.
Bed Knobs and
Yeah.
Broomsticks.
It's a terrifying film. Think about that. The fucking Knights
Fighting
of Armor.
Nazis with magic is terrifying.
And then like
Sounds fine with that.
Yeah.
Portobello Road going for 15 minutes. I'm scared. I'm officially terrified. So I was
Yeah,
thinking
that
of
does-
Chitty Bang Bang with the Child Snatcher, which is terrifying.
Okay, that
as
is
well.
terrifying.
Yeah,
That's
that's
fair.
pretty
Yes.
scary.
But anyway, massive sidetrack there. But
Still talking about horror.
But getting back to like what a classic like horror and what we know horror to be kind of thing. It's funny because the one I'm about to talk about is very much taking on like, it's got the paranormal kind of stuff that I think is like universally kind of talked about. So we've got poltergeists and exorcisms and possessed dolls and that kind of thing, which is not,
The doll thing, the possessed doll thing, fucks me up, yo. That
Yeah.
Chucky shit. You missed me with that, man. I was
Chucky's
fucking terrified of that
hilarious.
shit. The fucking Goosebumps thing.
Oh no, Goosebumps.
Goosebumps is
Night of the
scary.
Living Dummy.
Goosebumps, Night of the Living Dummy.
Okay,
dude.
I'm traumatized from that still.
That shit fucked me up.
That is
dude.
scary.
That is next level scary.
Chucky's
also,
not
that movie
scary.
Orphan.
Orphan is weird and
That was
scary.
fucking weird
But that
and scary,
twist is
dude.
so
Yeah.
funny. Come on.
Oh, the twist is fucking ridiculous, but it was terrifying.
No, Chucky. Okay, I feel like Chucky. You need to watch it because it's actually funny and dumb.
I haven't watched it since I was a
But
kid.
it's
Child's
pretty
Play,
hilarious. Yeah,
Child's Play is
Child's Play's
Chucky. But I think Night of the Living Dummy for Goosebumps, absolutely terrifying.
Dude, that was so scary.
Yeah. But I think so. It's funny because this show
was
that I'm
so
about to
low.
talk about. Yeah, Sam was really.
To be fair, I was scared of Roger Rabbit, so I get it.
Yeah. So the show I'm doing is called Ghost Hunt.
Mm-hmm.
And when we were talking this episode, I was like, oh my God, I watched a show when I was in high school. It came out in 2006.
Wow.
And I went, I think it was on YouTube. So I might upload it illegally on YouTube at the time. Now it's on Crunchyroll, so you can watch it there legally. And it's 2 seasons long, about 50 episodes, 25 each season. So it goes for quite a while.
Not bad.
But I remember being like, what is this dumb show? Anyway, I remember loving it. So when I realized that, I was like, it's one of the only shows I've watched that really deals with like ghost hunting.
Okay.
Like where detectives are paranormal. Like, and it is set in the modern day Japan at the time, and there's paranormal amongst us, and these people have to deal with it.
Cool.
And I like supernatural, but set in a Japanese high school. So it's kind of procedural like that. There's a monster of the week, and anyway, it starts with a high school girl. The whole whole series starts. A high school girl sitting in an empty classroom with 2 of her friends. They're telling ghost stories about. There's like an old school that is like abandoned, and it was like getting renovations, and everyone left because of some mysterious things happening to it. So they were like exchanging stories about it. And now they like got ghost stories about the teacher that killed themselves there, or the fact that it used to be like a hospital during the war, and like telling stories just for fun because they love ghost storytelling. And then this random mysterious stranger turns up and is kind of a bit weird, and this girl's sus on him. Turns out he's actually been hired by the school because he's a famous paranormal detective. Main character ends up accidentally destroying his camera equipment, and in doing so, when she goes to explore the old school to get some more ghost story things, his assistant gets injured, so then she's forced to become his assistant.
Classic.
He's also a prodigy and only 16, so they're the same age, so it's not weird. Cue this, basically in the same episode, all these the principal of the school doesn't trust just one person to kind of deal with it, so they bring in all these paranormal specialists. So you have like a shrine maiden who deals with exorcism in like that kind of religion. You have a monk.
Cool.
You have an Australian, which I was like, yeah, but I mean, literally there's like, I'm from Australia. He's a Catholic priest, he's an exorcist.
That would be great if they just
George
brought
Pell?
in
Yeah,
a
I was
maiden,
like,
a monk, and then an Australian with no context. Like,
G'day,
there's like
mates.
a psychic.
What's a
and
good
then
word, mates?
yeah, good
Yeah,
mate. Yeah.
and then there's this guy who just is like a good detective, I think, is the vibe. What I like about it is it reminded me of, like, it is pretty low stakes. She ends up getting embroiled and now becoming the official assistant of this, supernatural agency. It's sort of a bit of a romance happening, but not super crazy. Like it's just sort of like between the main two. It sort of reminds me of like, a procedural. Like what I like about it is that there's always one person, the main guy, who's a skeptic. So he will always try and prove that it was real life occurrences before. And they do that in The Conjuring as well. There's like a whole scene where they realize that it's actually like like something dripping and causing the thing to sink or something like that. And he'll figure that out. So like the reason everything's sliding that way is because the building's literally sinking.
So it's Fox
or
Mulder.
like it's kind of a...
No, sorry, it's Scully. Fox Mulder believes.
Mulder, he fucking believes.
So Mulder
You
believes.
better believe.
Scully
He had the
believes
poster.
nonsense. Yes.
Believes. And even she doesn't believe for too long in that series.
Yeah,
I'm like, babe,
Gosh.
how many more?
In the
like,
first season,
are
she sees
you
a lot
okay?
of shit.
And
I
she's
know.
like,
Straight
no.
Straight off the bat, it's like,
Nah.
dude, that thing was flying
Yeah.
into your face.
I think she gets abducted at one point. And
does.
she's still just like, I don't
Season
know
one.
about it.
No, maybe not.
She become pregnant with an alien? I think
I
that
think she
happened.
does.
Yeah, and then she's just like, I
Nah,
don't know.
don't believe it, don't believe
Nah.
Still skeptic.
Pretty sure
But
this is your trauma.
I enjoy like that.
Trauma response.
I wouldn't be like, wow, my favorite show of all time. But honestly, when I started watching it again for the episode, I watched like 6 episodes straight in a row. And I went, this show's good. It's actually quite creepy.
Yeah,
like
right.
the horror in it is scary enough. The one that freaked me out, again, classic, is the possessed doll. And a lot of the stuff that they do is like through the cameras that he sets up, because he's sort of a realistic paranormal agent detective. So he's got a lot of like that, gear that will test like thermal, like as in like thermal cameras
infrared and stuff.
Yeah, and so it's the stuff a lot of the animation will show, like just watching through back that. And for some reason, and same with Paranormal Activity, anything through a home camera, anything like found footage, I'm way more scared than I would be.
Yeah.
Like, this must be real. I say watching an animated thing that's like, but yeah, this show, it's by JC Stuff from 2006. Animation is nothing to write home about, but also nothing to scoff at. Like it's completely fine. Tone of it is surprisingly good, and I can't think of another anime like it at all.
Really?
And I think that it's funny because it's not really a good example because it doesn't follow it's not, I was going to do Another or Shiki. I could not find them on streaming services.
Yeah, neither could I.
Two very famous anime horror and like the number one kind of examples. Another is very
Right
much
up there.
And Shiki is like a vampire kind of mystery town one that is like, that's kind of, they're more like eerie, slow burn. This one doesn't really have so much eerie. It's kind of like, I'd say, X-Files Supernatural. We're going to find the monster of the week, deal with it, and have some romance in there too.
Right.
But it's like similar, as I would say, Supernatural has scared the shit out of me a bunch of times.
Totally,
I've watched
me too.
Supernatural and been like, I'm fucking scared. Buffy's scared.
X-Files as well.
Yeah. Oh, X-Files is that guy that fucking can bet.
Oh, it goes through the
Oh my
pipes
God,
and
he's the
stuff.
scariest character
Stretches.
in history. I
And
can't cope.
the cursed fucking doll again.
In X-Files?
Yeah, there's a doll episode, man. It makes the woman hit herself in the head with a hammer. It's fucked.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
Hate that.
You know
Yeah.
what? You never saw, was it Tommy Knockers? Stephen King's Tommy Knockers with the dolls?
No.
Yeah.
I can't be doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that
why
a doll
doll's
thing?
so scary? Annabelle, have you
What?
seen the Annabelle doll?
Terrifying. Fuck, dude.
Just wait till you see my Harrison Ford doll.
Coming out of a bathtub.
Just in the bath.
So What Life Is such a weird, like,
I'm
it's
just
such
telling
a
you,
weird,
you asked
like,
me what I remember as a kid
such
being
a
fucking
dank
terrified of.
reference to a 90s horror film
Yeah.
that
I'm
no
just telling
one,
you what I-
not even a horror, a thriller.
A thriller.
A thriller
A
film where it turns out the
psychological
husband's
thriller.
abusive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but they're jump
Which is probably
scares,
the real
man.
horror.
Exactly.
Oh.
Real horror. Psychological.
Just don't get married to Harrison Ford, you'll be fine.
Oh, Calista Flockhart seems all right.
I haven't seen her in years.
Ally McBeal.
I mean, come on, has anyone?
Is she still having visions like Ally McBeal? Is she okay?
Someone better check that Harrison Ford's bathtub. That's all I'm going to say.
But Ghost Hunt, you can find on Crunchyroll. If you honestly, it's a good watch. High school though, so high school shenanigans.
A lot of these are. Another's also set in a high school. Higurashi, When They Cry, another very famous
like bait and switch one,
bait and switch.
where you think that you're watching a like cute high school thing, and then you're like,
Messed up.
oh my God. So I think
Remake
anime
of that
can
just come out
do
too.
eerie.
What was that one that came out recently where the girl sees ghosts? And
Iruku-chan.
she pretends not to see them.
That was actually, that's an interesting case because like that was a comedy horror show, which is a weird kind of mishmatch. Because some of it was actually fucking creepy and terrifying. The really creepy part was how sexualized it was. I hated that.
Okay.
Which is why I didn't watch it. I watched the first 3 episodes and I remember coming on and doing the episode and being like, the 3rd episode happened and it wasn't that much fan service. It was really great. And then like we released the episode. The 4th episode came out and I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
Now I look like an idiot.
It's gonna get better, guys. I
was
promise.
like, maybe it's getting better, everyone. It's worse. I was like, fuck.
I've been reading a webtoon. Sorry, bring it back to webtoons
Always
again.
back to
Gateway
webtoons,
to
Charlie.
webtoon. There's a really good romance that I'm reading at the moment called Half Ghost, which is actually a sequel to a show called Ghost Bride. It is. I love the way they do it. It reminds me of what that show could have been.
Yes.
Which is where like the world goes on, but this girl, her eyes suddenly awaken, and everything around her is like the ghosts that she can see are completely fucked. So where if your eyes are awake, like everywhere you go, there will just be these creepy ass ghosts.
Yeah, like Maruka-chan.
And if your eyes are awake, you suddenly smell really good to them. So like,
that was Maruka-chan too.
and then
yeah, I
you
noticed that,
nearly
yeah.
get
okay.
notice
Same
you,
show.
and they start to like. But the thing is that you have to either become a bride of a ghost of someone, and they become like it's not sexual. It's actually, I mean, it is later. It's a romance. But you end up like having to become a ghost bride, and then if you like a strong ghost has to kind of like mark you as their own, or you will be eaten. But it isn't necessarily sexual. There's some ghost brides that just like happen to be.
Necessarily.
No.
Well, the strong ghost needs to mark you. What? Are you listening to yourself? What the fuck are you talking
It's
about?
not sexual.
No, it's not sexual.
No.
Not sexual at
Hang
all.
on. Now I've said it out loud. It's a really creepy. It's a great example of like wholesome but fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, they're greater connotations, of course, but you know.
But yeah, look, this horror show, Elfen Lied, another super problematic horror anime, which we have done a video about because it's heavily influenced Stranger Things, whether it's conscious or subconscious from the creators. I think they have admitted that they've been influenced by Elfen Light, haven't they?
Yeah, and Stranger Things had a very horror-heavy season this season.
Very much so,
lent in
actually.
really
Yeah,
hard
good stuff,
to that.
though.
It was good.
And in fact, one of the great influences, I don't know if they were influenced by this manga and or anime, but I'm going to talk about one of the few horror shows that I really, really like. And that is called, well, the manga is called Parasyte, but the anime version is called Parasyte the Maxim. So this is a science fiction horror series written and illustrated by Hitoshi Iwaki, published in Kodansha's Morning Open Zokan and Monthly Afternoon Magazine from 1988 to 1995. I actually didn't realize it was that old because the anime remake came out in 2014. In Japan anyway, till March 2015, and then released in the US in October 2015 to April 2016. And as of December 2020, the manga had over 24 million copies in circulation. It's huge.
Wow, so it was really a lot older before it got adapted.
Way older.
Wow, yeah, I didn't know that either.
I was like, when I was doing the research, I was like, oh shit, it's that old. But it was famously made by Madhouse in 2014. And it looks great. It looks great. There's some slightly dodgy, like you can tell they've gone the CG route when it's like background scene, people crossing a road. I'm like, the fuck is that? Clearly
the fucking bear is there again. Sorry, that was another episode. Don't worry. That was our last
For those
episode
who have
throwback.
listened to the last episode, yes, that is a good throwback. But yeah, kind of like super janky. I was like, why are they walking so weird? But yes, anyway, the rest of the animation is actually fantastic. But Parasyte follows the protagonist Shinichi Izumi, who is just an everyday 17-year-old high school student. One night, a tiny worm-like alien basically falls from space, and they have a drill-like head. These are the aforementioned parasites. They've arrived on Earth seemingly all over the place. So their purpose is to burrow into humans' brains via the ear or the nose. Now, Shinichi has the misfortune of being one such target seemingly at random. So fortunately for Shinichi, he sleeps with his headphone buds in. So it can't go in through his ear. So it tries to go in through his nose. He then wakes up, sneezes it out, only to have it jump into his hand. Burrows into his right hand, but he thankfully very quickly decides to wrap his headphones around his arm and sort of pull it as a tourniquet and stops it from taking over his brain. He's then freaking out. His parents walk in. They're like, what the fuck? And he's like, a snake's burrowed into my hand.
That's the worst. Like, I can't. That's my biggest fear. A snake burrowing into my Not like any, like,
So
no.
not Harrison Ford.
Yeah, it's not Harrison Ford in bathtub.
That's up there.
It's pretty scary.
Similar things, really.
Yeah, I guess you two growing up in Australia, yeah, snakes burrowing into hands might be a thing.
It's
Absolutely.
a pretty this show.
It's
actually a pretty hectic
it's
show.
very gory.
But anyway, his parents are like, "You on drugs, motherfucker? Like, what's going on here?" And he's like, "I tell you, there's a snake in my hand." They're like, "Yeah, cool, bro. Just go to sleep and stop smoking meth."
Is that verbatim?
They do say, "Are you on drugs? You better not be on drugs." And he's like, "I'm not." But subtext is like, "Get out of here, bro."
Give me some of that snake burrowing into my hands drugs.
I'll have what he's having.
He then awakens to a voice saying, "I have failed." He's like, "What? You failed what? What was that?" Kind of stumbles out, heads in to school. But his right hand is acting weird, starting to do things of its own volition, like grabbing things it shouldn't and doing things seemingly outside of his own conscious control. Basically, he's then heading home from school after this weird day of his right hand doing some weird shit. And a young girl runs out, chasing a ball, and a car is about to hit her. He runs out as the car is about to certainly kill them both. He Clark Kent's the motherfucker and stops it dead in its tracks, totals the car, saves the girl. But then when he looks up at his hand, there's an eyeball staring back at him and these big old like claw-like blades coming out of his hand. He's like, what the fuck? Goes home and he's freaking out and then grabs a blade and tries to stab his own hand. The hand blocks it, comes to life in this kind of, it's very, again, body horror-esque. This show is full body horror, by the way. Tries to grab it, stops it, and he's like, what's going on? It starts talking to him. Turns out this creature is called Migi, which actually is, in Japanese, right. right hand.
Huh.
So essentially, him and Miggy having failed to take over the brain, they're a bit like the Yerks from Animorphs.
I was going to say, is this literally Animorphs?
Yeah, it's kind of the Yerks from Animorphs, right? So,
God, what a show.
what a show.
book
What a
series.
book series. Love that shit.
One of the best theme songs.
We had brought this up before when we did our Netflix walkthrough back in season 1, but I glossed over it very quickly.
Apparently the live action's pretty good as well.
Very much so, yeah. So basically him and Miggy, and I like that he's called Shinichi, kind of sounds like synergy. You know, they have to create this sort of synergistic relationship between each other. They both still maintain their own consciousness, their ideas, but they have to coexist. They're hunted by the more well-established parasites, which have taken over full brains. But like the opening scene of this show is just like this husband and wife standing there. The husband's got his hands on her shoulders, and all of a sudden, like the Stranger Things creature, the one's like,
Demogorgon.
just like that, the guy's face just starts like contorting, like almost Junji Ito style. Then it turns into a big Demogorgon-like thing, just eats a fucking face. And you're like, okay. Literally the opening sequence. You're like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And then the next scene comes back and then you hear this like, so fucked. Like, Dad, what's going on? And then he's like all fucked up face and just walks off to quite clearly, finish the job. It's pretty fucked. And but yeah, super violent, super body horror style, but actually a really good show. Like, it is quite scary, but it's like, it's kind of cool. It actually has a real plot that it follows through. It's not just random scary vignettes or anything like that. The relationship between Shinichi and Miggy is actually kind of beautiful in a weird way. But, it explores philosophical, psychological questions such as like, what does it mean to be human? Are humans the ultimate parasite? The role of instinct and love, and the very notion of morality itself. What if a higher level predator was to arrive on Earth? Are we actually that great? That's kind of the whole question that it keeps raising about morality and parasites.
But
Are we the ultimate parasite? It's fucking cool.
does it ask what lies beneath?
I mean, kind
We'll
of.
never know.
We'll never,
You turned it off as soon as I
we'll never
mentioned
know.
it. Okay.
Also, now I've remembered the actual plot. It's not Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford's wife, who was killed beforehand, is the ghost,
Yeah.
the poltergeist,
Yeah.
if you will. Real spoilers now.
Yeah, but he's the killer. So
He is the killer, but she comes back,
good on her.
finishes the job.
Honestly, good for her.
I agree. A Yuri, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we have come full circle.
Is there an anime adaptation?
Shut it
of
down!
Lies Beneath?
We've
I don't need
actually
this anymore.
somehow
We've related
legitimately
this.
brought that back. I'm proud of us.
I'm not.
Parasyte the Maxim. It's on Netflix. It's also on Crunchyroll. It's really fucking good. You've seen it, right?
Yeah, I think I watched the first. Is there 2 seasons? Or
Yeah,
just
there
one?
are, yeah.
Yeah, I only watched the first season. I remember being profoundly disturbed by
It's pretty
the
hectic.
opening sequence. And
Sequence.
because I'm fine with horror, as I said, I like being scared, but I find sometimes gory stuff, I'm just a bit like,
pretty
oh,
gory.
you got to be good. And I think the show is good, but I was like, oh, brutal. Like you got to be in the right mood to watch that,
Yeah, it's pretty hectic. And there's a very famous sequence that you can look up on YouTube where one of the parasites goes and takes on an entire Yakuza cell. And it's it's classic Madhouse at their peak, not quite at their peak, but at their firing on all cylinders. It looks incredible. He takes out this whole group and sees how many times he gets shot.
Sure.
He's like, oh, you got me 3 times. Okay, good to know. What they can. It's a very cool sequence. Very, very famous. Yeah. So look, Parasyte the Maxim, very, very cool. Like I said, there are many others we've missed out here, like Higurashi, another Elfen Lied. All these big heavy hitters.
Devilman Crybaby, I'd say, is a horror.
Oh, definitely is.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it is. And that's on Netflix as well. And it's worth watching, but my God,
fucked.
it's like that. Oh, yeah. I find,
I struggled to watch that.
yeah, it's pretty full on and hypersexually
very
charged as
sexualized,
well.
yeah.
And so if you're not into that, do not watch it. But I think it's a good show and it's well animated and it's great music
Yeah,
as well.
it's Masaki Yuasa as
It's
well.
really well done. But I feel like when we talk about horror and anime, we tend to mostly talk about gory anime.
Yeah, it's
Elfen
true,
Lied
yeah.
and yeah, because other than Ghost Hunt, which is a full on just paranormal sci-fi horror, and obviously Junji Ito is famously horror. But
Yeah.
there's not that much. There should be more, but maybe there's not because it doesn't translate quite as well because we've got live action horror films which kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also think anime itself can be quite violent. At
Oh,
times
massively.
Anyway. They're never shy from disemboweling and beheading and stuff.
There's elements of horror in many, many shows which aren't
You've
pure
seen-
horror, like
Attack on Titan is horrific.
definitely
Yeah.
has some
Is
horror.
it a horror?
elements.
No, but
No,
is it
but yes,
terrifying and has the same
of it.
sort of, people get mutilated.
I'd say
spat out.
ReZero is a bit of a horror too.
About to say ReZero has
Yeah.
some horror,
Oh,
horror
the bunnies.
elements.
Nice.
Oh, the bunnies.
The bunnies, that was fucked.
Yeah.
And also Psycho Pass sort of has some elements.
Yeah,
kind of psychological horror
psychological,
also. But
Sci-fi stuff.
you
yeah.
see elements of it all over the place. But like when you talk about just pure
Pure
horror films
horror,
or
yeah.
pure horror genre, you just don't see it that much.
It's like,
Problematic.
yeah, because I feel like when I think of horror, I think of serial killers or ghosts, hauntings,
yeah.
that kind of thing.
Or
Just
slasher
kinda
films.
Slasher, yeah. Well, that's serial killer.
That is Gateway to Anime's little look into horror. And there is certainly plenty of stuff out there, but it's not as ubiquitous or as dense a genre in the medium as you would think. If you really want to watch some crazy horror films, go watch the Japanese live action films, And also there's some other stuff like, what's that fucking film? Audition? That thing
Audition,
is
man, that scared the shit out of me.
That film is fucked, dude. Like,
Yeah,
that's one of the
that's-
most Itchy the Killer. That's even worse.
Killer,
It's one of the most
yeah.
horrible. I couldn't even get 10 minutes into it. Yeah, there is some crazy shit out there in the Japanese horror genre. Anyway, that is our horror episode. Junji Ito, again, is the undisputed king. Uzumaki, we are all waiting for it. Even I will watch it.
Go read his other stuff. Go read
I'm not doing
Tomei.
that.
Go read Goyo.
Sam's
Go read his
terrified
short
already.
stories. His short stories are incredible as well.
Mm.
One chapter's bang, change your life.
There you
And
go,
break you.
everyone who's not me.
I think you would enjoy it.
Look, I have no question that, when we're talking undisputed king level,
Mm.
obviously it's going to be something I can appreciate. But again, it's just not my jam. Anyway, of course, as always, we'd like to thank our wonderful patrons. That is, of course, Grant. That is Curtis, Rose, Dom, Alex, Samantha, Caroline, Christian. Y'all are the best. And if you want to join our Patreon, you can. www.patreon.com/gateway to anime. I mean, honestly, even if you want to do the $1.50, it means so much to us. It helps us so much. But all good. If you want to follow us on our socials, of course, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, or hit us up on our website, www.gatewaytoanime.com. Charlie, Graham, thank you so much. Graham, we're not going to see you for a little while, my friend. You are off on a sojourn of
I'll
some
be venturing to the Europes,
Yes.
but I like Harrison Ford, I'll return. Or his wife will return. I will return like Harrison Ford's
From
wife.
the watery grave.
Yeah.
I hope you don't go into
Coming
the
to a
watery
bathtub
grave.
near you.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Safe travels. We'll miss you very much and look forward to your return. We'll be finding some other guests to fill the big shoes that you will be leaving us.
I'll leave the shoes here.
They can slip into them. Charlie, thanks as always. Good times. Catch you next time. See you later.